Hello, and welcome to this Beyond Clean virtual conference. The speakers for today's conference, the sponsors for today's conference, and the Beyond Clean team are all so excited that you're here. If this is your first time joining us for a Beyond Clean virtual event, I want to call your attention to a couple of event functions. All of the windows on your event screen are movable. You can shrink them, you can enlarge them, you can move them, whatever you need to do to create the event feel that works best for you. In the upper right corner is a resources tool. Download conference sponsor information and the resources and links that your speakers have provided for you. On the bottom left, you will see a Q&A or question and answer tool. Any questions that you have for the speaker during each session can be submitted to them using this feature. Our speakers today will bring you a wealth of knowledge, and all of their information can be found in the speaker bio tool on the right side of your screen. Along the bottom are the icons for each of the windows as well. Clicking these will minimize and maximize each window. This will be an action-packed conference, and there are breaks between each of the sessions. So feel free to grab a snack, check on the dogs or the kids, assemble a tray, do some jumping jacks, whatever you need to do before joining us again.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I am Brett Norton with Beyond Clean, and I have to say we're really excited to welcome back everybody that has been with us before, and would also like to extend a huge thank you to those that have not been with us before. So welcome. You're in for a great day of exciting discussions and a lot of in-depth knowledge when it comes to data. We would also, I'd first like to really introduce the conference. The conference name is All Worked Up Smart Productivity and Sterile Processing. We will explore the what, why, and who's behind smart productivity and sterile processing and provide you and your SPD with the tools to become data-driven and to become a data-driven force to be reckoned with. Our all-star lineup of industry experts, frontline professionals, and data insiders are joining us for a day of thought-provoking discussions with live Q&A during each session. So please send in your questions throughout the conference. We love to have some engagement. I really like to thank our event sponsor, Census Technologies, for helping make this day of education possible, and would also like to extend a sincere thank you to our partners over at First Case for collaboration for today's event. CE credits will be available after the conference, and at the very close of the conference, you will be automatically directed to the 6 CE conference survey following today's conference. A little bit of housekeeping. Since we are dealing with technology and technology is very useful today, we also have some issues sometimes. So if your video freezes or if you have some audio issues, please go ahead and refresh your browser. That fixes the issue 99.9% of the time. And if you have any issues, please send a question into the chat. I'm more than happy to help you on the back end of that. So please do so if you need any help. We also have some new icons. This is a new feature in our platform. We have a smiley face. So you can share your reactions to the information presented throughout today's conference sessions by selecting your favorite emoji. Click the smiley face icon to like, laugh, and celebrate an insightful quote or opinion from your favorite speakers. We'd love to share this awesome day of education with your friends and coworkers directly to your favorite social media platform by selecting the share icon. Connect your network of SPD professionals to the latest productivity and data insights. What is available in the resource window? We've got sponsor-provided brochures and product information up on the right side. And we've also got our Beyond Clean LinkedIn page for you to follow as well. We'd love for you to subscribe to our weekly newsletter so you can stay up to date on the latest Beyond Clean content and educational events. I'd like for you to sit back, relax, assemble that tray, and let us get started. Our speakers today for this first session is Seamus Johnson. He's the senior software developer at Census Technologies. Seamus and his team work closely with customers to identify and solve the most important issues faced in sterile processing. Kelly Swales is a clinical business manager at Census Technologies. In her role, Kelly manages the Service Plus program, provides governing standards and regulation information to company personnel, oversees educational opportunities and events, and provides CensiTrack utilization assessments for customers. The presentation title is Work Smarter, Not Harder, Doing More with the Resources You Have. Recruiting high-quality sterile processing professionals continues to be a challenge many SPD hiring managers are struggling to overcome. With staffing shortages becoming the new normal, how can departments do more with the resources they currently have? Seamus and Kelly are joining us to explain how SPDs are leveraging their current resources to eliminate wasted effort, thereby enabling current staff to fill in the gaps of staffing shortages. They will also provide key insights into the most important trays your team should be optimizing to increase the productivity output in your department. So without further ado, let's welcome Seamus and Kelly.
All right. Thank you, Brett. And Kelly's with me today. So yeah, as Brett said, I work for Census. I've been with Census for almost 20 years now. Today, I spend most of my time talking to our customers and, trying to understand what are their biggest challenges. What is it that we at Census could go and solve? And today I'm super excited. Kelly and I get to share with you some of the stuff that we've learned from our customers over the years. As Brett said, really, we want to share with you some practical examples of how those learnings can be put into practice. So today we're talking about working smarter, not harder. I know this will come as a shock to nobody, but it is and has been for as long as I've been working at Census, difficult to attract and retain talented sterile processing professionals. It's always been bad when the pandemic hit. I think, based on what customers have told me, that was really an inflection point for the industry. I know a lot of hospitals had to stop doing elective procedures at that time, and many folks were furloughed. And so a lot of people, a lot of sterile processing technicians left the industry at that point. And then after the pandemic, labor costs started going up. Here, I live in Middle Tennessee, and here in Middle Tennessee, Target starts people at $20 an hour. So that's for somebody who's right out of high school and considering whether they want a career in retail or a career in healthcare, that's making that decision very difficult. Personally, I think, the better career choice is healthcare. I think long term it offers more for people, but it is hard when you consider the pay and the environment you work in and things like that. So many of our customers are struggling. They're understaffed, and they are looking to the data in their tracking systems to help them understand, how do we continue to support the demands of the operating room with the staff we have today? And so that's what we're going to be talking about. As Brett said, really objectives for this session, demonstrate effective techniques for identifying the most important trays to optimize. We all know that, when you send a tray up, there's a certain percentage of the instruments in there that'll get used, and there's a certain percentage of the instruments that oftentimes never get used. And so finding ways to optimize trays, is always good. You burn a lot of calories doing that. So it's important to use data to understand which trays should be at the top of that list. Also, we want to understand how to accurately estimate the amount of time that should be required to assemble a tray. And that's important for a couple of different reasons. And we'll get into this, but, and again, this won't come as a shock to anybody here, but, understanding what's driving that assembly time can help us understand what is driving our capacity or our throughput, our ability to support the demands of the OR, and can help us understand what can be done to improve that. In addition to that, understanding how long it should take to assemble a tray can help us to find outliers too, places where a technician might benefit from additional coaching, or find a place where, and this happens sometimes, people find ways to cut corners, and that can lead to mistakes, can lead to poor data fidelity, and a number of other things. So understanding what a tray assembly time should be based on all the different factors for that tray can be important. And with that, you want to understand, how complex is this tray? So finding ways to implement a tray complexity standard can be important. That's another activity that burns a lot of calories. If you're a level 1 trauma center, you might have, 1,000 different kinds of trays, maybe more in some cases. And going through and evaluating each one of those and assigning, an intensity level or a complexity level to those trays, again, can take a lot of time. So using the data in your tracking system to do this in a smarter way can be super beneficial. And then, one of the things that technicians always tell us, departments always tell us, is that there's so much really important work that goes on in sterile processing, and very often that work is not recognized. And so I think anytime we can, with data, recognize the really great work that sterile processing departments do, that pays huge dividends. Everybody deserves to be recognized when they do an outstanding job. Sterile processing does a super important job. If you think about it, the OR doesn't do procedures without sterile processing. If sterile processing isn't cleaning the instrumentation, nothing happens in the OR. And it's really the engine of that operating room. And I think that's really important to recognize. All right, Kelly?
Thank you, Seamus. So, as Seamus mentioned, we are in this staffing crisis throughout the whole United States for sterile processing. So I think this opportunity to present today's topic couldn't have come at a better time. Typically, I visit about 60 to 75 different healthcare facilities per year. And out of all those facilities, I'm only seeing that about 7% are fully staffed. And a lot of them, they're missing half their staff. So imagine having, you have 40 FTEs, your full-time employees, and you only have 20. It's really hard to do what you have to do and get it all done. And so then you bring in those new staff, and now we're finding that a lot of them, they're very green to sterile processing. Or they, maybe they did work in sterile processing someplace else. Now they come here. If you're like me, many years ago, I worked, 6 years as a scrub, processed our own instruments, went to a new facility, and we didn't do open hearts at my hospital. So I didn't know my heart trays. I didn't know my neuro trays. So there's always these things you need to take into consideration. And when you look at your inventory optimization, as Seamus shared, you think, okay, well, what is inventory optimization? So I looked in, I went to go to Google and kind of put a bunch of that together and came up with what kind of combines everything. The process and balance of having the right amount of inventory to meet demand by using less capital and workforce to maintain the demand and supply for your customers. So it's more than your turnovers. It's having the right inventory at the right time for the right procedure without added expense, such as labor and process, to have that inventory ready. So whether you have 20 trays or 20,000 trays, that inventory optimization, it's doable. It's encouraged, and it's so important. When you think of what's optimizing your inventory, I say, look at your trays, figure out which ones you use, which ones you don't. But then let's go a little deeper. So for years, I worked in the OR. I scrubbed many, many, many C-sections. And we never once used that Simpson forceps that was always in the C-section tray. And even 5 years I worked at a teaching hospital. Never once did we have a surgeon teach a resident, a fellow, on how to use that Simpson forceps. I always had this fear in the back of my mind, like, oh my goodness, I've never had to use it. I always put it together, but if we ever have to use it, hopefully I don't have to do anything, because I had never used it. And we didn't use it because it was traumatic versus the disposable mushrooms, the different things that they had. But yet it still stayed in that set. And I was a service leader for L&D, and I kept saying, can we take it out of there? Can we take it out of there? Nope, nope, nope. Dr. Smith, it's got to be in there. And I said, well, why can't we take it out, wrap it, and just put it in a drawer? If we need it, it's there. Nope. And you think of, there you are working harder, not smarter, because we don't need this in here. It's heavy. It's 2 pieces. Decontam has to take it apart and clean it. Then you have to go over the assembly side. You're putting it back in the tray. And then even your techs in the OR, they're having to take it out of the tray, count it when they're doing their counts. And it's like, get rid of some of that stuff that you don't need. Seamus, I will turn this over to you. Whoops.
Sorry, I think we both clicked. Yeah. So that's exactly right. So, as Kelly said, if you walk into any hospital in the United States, you're going to find there's a certain number of their trays that just never get used. Sometimes you'll have, a life-saving tray that has to be on hand, rarely gets used, but when it is used, it saves a life, and that's important and that's fine. But very often, and you guys know this, there's trays that'll be in the core area or in storage that haven't been used in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Sometimes that's because the surgeon that used it has turned over. Sometimes it's because the case mix has changed. There's all kinds of reasons for that. But those trays take up space, and they have instrumentation in them that could be repurposed for something else. Everybody's got a budget for purchasing new instrumentation, replacing stuff that gets lost, repairing stuff that's damaged. And with the tracking systems we have today, the data exists to help us understand what could be repurposed. So what we found, what our customers have done that's worked well for them, is to first off set a policy. So you work with the operating room and you say, look, we're going to review any tray that hasn't been used in X period of time. It could be 12 months, could be 18 months, something like that. But you say, okay, we're gonna come and we're gonna review maybe quarterly or 2 times a year. We're gonna review all the trays that haven't been used in a year. Our expectation is that most of those trays can be repurposed. Some of them, the OR will say, like I said, that's a life-saving tray. We have to have it. But our expectation is that most of the trays, when they're not used for 12 months or 18 months, something like that, whatever the policy is, that we'll be able to repurpose it. And then we'll use the data from our tracking system. And like I said, all the tracking systems do this, where you have electronic count sheets. They know what's in those trays, and we'll use that information to understand where that instrumentation can fill in gaps. So as you're buying, more needle holders or Adson forceps or whatever the case may be, very often with these tracking systems, you can say, okay, I need this. What's on my list of trays that can be broken down that meets this need, right? And then you can break down those trays. So sometimes that means, breaking down those trays immediately and then organizing the instrumentation into the pegboard so that you got it. Sometimes there's other ways to do it, but the important point is that you want to use the data in your system to understand, first off, which trays can be cannibalized or broken down. And then you want to get the trays out of those storage areas because, that's just taking up space. Most of the facilities that we talk to don't have lots of extra space. That's fairly common. And when those storage areas get full or get cluttered, that actually means it takes more time to keep things organized, and for people to put things away or pull for cases, find what they need. So super important to make sure that you don't have lots of wasted inventory. And this is really the first step in what Kelly was getting at. So first, you want to get rid of the excess trays, repurpose that instrumentation. You'll see an immediate cost savings from doing that because you're not spending as much money buying new trays. And then we get to the next part, and that's what we're going to talk about next, which is optimizing the count sheets themselves. So I don't want to spoil anything. I'll turn it back over to Kelly here.
Thank you, Seamus. And if I can just piggyback on what you said, I've been to facilities that they have anywhere from 15 containers in their database to 20,000 containers in their database. And you think of, okay, where do I start? So where do I start? And work with your OR. I'm sure they don't want those extra trays cluttering their inventory, having to dig through those to get to what they need. Or if you get rid of those extra trays, the ones they use more often could be closer to the OR from the storage, area. And, it's kind of like, think about, you could start with a service. You could start with your smallest service, maybe thinking of your service leaders, but you're going to work with the OR. And you could think, okay, well, who's going to be the easiest one to get on board? And when you show success that hey, we did this with the ENT service and we had a lot of success with this, then you're going to get more buy-in from the others. The key thing is you just got to start. You just got to start somewhere and then go from there. Count sheets. So count sheets. So think back in the day when we called them recipes. There is something to be said for that word. Recipe is what it is. I mean, it is what goes in that container. We used to call them recipes for years until we started counting instruments. Then the term went to count sheets. And when you think about, you used to go literally to a recipe box, pull out the recipe card, and that's where you would take it to your workstation and assemble your container. And it would say on there three Richardsons. That's all it would say. Because we knew that meant a small, a medium, and a large. But those days are gone. We've added laparoscopic, Da Vinci, more complex procedures, which means more complex instruments. And so we have to get that exactly right as to what goes in that container. Many times I see camera light cord is the container and there's no count sheet. And it's because we can't print the count sheet, because we can't put the paper in the STARAD. And so we don't need a count sheet. And it's like, you're right. Maybe you don't need a count sheet, but you do need a recipe. I need to know which camera goes in there, which light cord, is there a light cord adapter? And I'm a firm believer in putting your chemical integrators on that count sheet. Because not only is it going to let the OR know how many are in there, so when they're doing their counts, they should account for those, because you never know when it's stuck to an instrument, it's stuck to a retractor, and now you left it behind in a patient. But you really want to get those in there too. And think of those new staff coming in that are green to sterile processing. To succeed, they have to have the tools to do their job, which is a count sheet or recipe. And then you think of your productivity. If you don't have a count sheet, it's really hard to say how many instruments are you processing. So we're all quick to say how many containers and peel packs we process a month. But when you're saying, yep, we process about 3,000 containers a month. Well, does that container have one instrument in it because it's just a scope? Or does it have 102 instruments in it because it's an open heart tray? So that's why it is so important to get those count sheets in there, so that not only will your staff have the tools to do their job, but then you know exactly what goes in there. And many times people will say, yes, we have a bunch of different vendors. We have so many different vendors. How do I know which one to put in? Well, you can optimize that too by putting in your substitutes, by putting in your most common vendor, and then going from there. And like I said, working with that OR, believe me, they don't want those extra instruments in there either, because that's just one more instrument that they have to count. And start with your easiest, the one you think you'll pull more instruments from. Or like I said, that service leader who will be all gung-ho to remove them, or with the smallest service, you just need to start. Seamus, I will pass this over to you.
All right.
I'll let you
Thanks,
click to the
Kelly.
next slide.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Kelly. Yeah. So again, having electronic data is going to be super helpful here. So one of the things that we've learned by studying data from our customers is that, and again, this isn't going to be a huge shock to anybody, but there is a direct relationship between how many instruments are in trays and how many trays a department can process in a day. And in fact, the relationship is linear. What that means is that, and again, nobody's going to be surprised by this, but seeing it in the data is really important. If you were to double the number of instruments in a tray, it's going to take twice as long to clean all that stuff. It's going to take twice as long to assemble it. And that we see very clearly in the data. So if we look at, a couple of hundred facilities, we can see that as the average tray size for each of those facilities goes up, the number of trays that those facilities are processing per person goes down. So if you count how many trays are processed in a day, divide that by the number of technicians they have working that day, that's their number of trays processed per person. You can think about that as the throughput per person at that facility. And that throughput per person is in direct correlation with the average size of the trays that they're actually processing. So this is where, having data can really help you. And in a couple of different ways. So first off, by knowing which trays are processed most often, you can understand which trays are most important to optimize. And secondly, you can measure and predict the impact of that optimization because you know that there's that linear relationship. And this gets a little nerdy here. So if you have questions, we'll answer those at the end. But essentially, what I mean by this is, let's say you've got two different trays that have too much stuff in them. Maybe one's, I'm going to make some stuff up here, but maybe one's an ortho set and one's a hand tray. And let's say there's 10 instruments in each that you feel pretty confident could be broken out either into a second tray or peel packed or just removed altogether. If that ortho tray is processed, say 1,000 times in a year, and the hand tray, this is probably not accurate, but the hand tray is only processed 100 times in a year, then removing 10 instruments from the ortho tray is going to have 10 times the impact on your throughput, right? Because you processed it 10 times more often. So if you think about that in terms of the number of not trays, but instruments that people touch every day in your department, the ortho tray in this example is going to have the bigger impact because it's getting processed 10 times as much. So you can take the data that you collect through your tracking system. Your tracking system is going to know what got processed every day, right? You can look at which trays are processed every day. You can count how many times each tray was processed over a given period of time. Many of the reports in these tracking systems can do this for you, and then rank those trays accordingly. And then you can look at, from that list, from that ranked list, which trays are likely to be candidates for optimization. Sometimes you know this because you know your trays. Sometimes you can look at the number of instruments on the count sheets for those trays and see where there's an opportunity. So if something has 70 instruments in it, that could be an opportunity for optimization. So when you do optimize your trays, like Kelly said, that's a task that burns a lot of calories, right? You've got to go and you got to get buy-in from the surgeons. You got to get buy-in from the OR in general. But the dividends are huge. So if you can identify just the top 5 trays that are most important to optimize by looking at what gets turned the most and what has the most bloat in it, you're going to have the largest impact. So the idea here is, by doing that, you want to get 80% of the benefit of tray optimization with only 20% of the effort. Again, everybody's stretched super thin, so finding ways to be super efficient with this, it makes it possible in a lot of cases. So you can get that data out of your electronic system. Again, figure out which trays are used the most, which trays have the most instruments, and then you can project what the impact is going to be. Because, like I said, the relationship between the number of instruments and trays and how many trays you're able to turn every day is linear. So let's say you can look at your tracking system and see, what does a typical day look like? What trays are turned in a typical day or in a typical week? Add up all the instruments in those trays, right? So some of those trays are going to be turned multiple times. So the instruments for the trays that are turned multiple times in a day or in a week, they're going to add, they're going to have an outsized impact on that total number of instruments. Then look at how many instruments you could remove through optimization. Again, you're going to get that multiple factor when you're targeting trays that are turned more than once every day, and look at the difference. So if by taking 10 instruments out of 5 different trays, and those 5 trays make up 25% of what gets turned in a day, you can do the math and figure out, well, how much does this reduce the total number of instruments we have to touch in a day? And that'll give you a projection for how much additional throughput you should see from this optimization. So you might be able to project 25% additional throughput, 30% additional throughput, just by optimizing a handful of trays. We see that very often with our customers. So super huge impact for relatively low effort compared to a full optimization of all your trays. Can be huge. And again, when we're talking about departments where you constantly got open recs, the number of cases that are being run every day is going up and up and up. You've got to find ways to continue to turn those trays for the OR with the staff you've got. So again, this is a tangible opportunity to reduce the amount of work you actually have to do. So in a way, it's not working. It is working smarter, but it's not necessarily doing more with less. It's doing less, right? It's looking at the total amount of work that has to be done and eliminating work that really wasn't adding any value, right? If the instruments aren't used, there's no point in processing them every time. So that's all you're doing. You're just not processing stuff that was never used to begin with. And like Kelly said, the surgical techs, they're going to love that as well, right? The nurses are going to love that. It's less to count. It's less to, manage and all that kind of stuff. Super awesome opportunity there. Kelly.
Thank you, Seamus. So, quality versus quantity, that ever famous question that we all want that answer to. Um, it's like, who has that answer? So, it's March Madness, and everyone's all about their brackets. And you think of the Warren Buffett has offered a payout to anyone who gets a perfect bracket. And I've read that it's $1 million. I've read that it's $1 billion. I've read it's 500 million and you're done, or 25 million a year for 40 years if you get that perfect bracket. And as I'm thinking through, March Madness, watching it last weekend on TV, and all I can think is, oh my goodness, we need Warren Buffett to help us put that money out there. Get someone to come up with that answer. How do we find that balance? It's all about finding that happy medium. And what do you do? So you've got Sally, who is slower at putting things together, but her quality is top notch. Never has an error. Everything's always beautiful. Everything's always perfect. The OR loves her trays. And then you got Frank, Speedy over here, who just whips right through everything, can do twice as much as Sally. And his error rate, maybe he misses an integrator once a month, or once every 6 months there's an issue. The problem that comes with that is you don't want to be too fast, but you got to be fast. You got to keep that moving. But you also have to look at that quality. And when we look at where do you go and find that happy medium? Talking with customers, and they had, one person had said, what about putting the average time it takes to assemble a container, putting it right on that container label, or using your free text label, typing out, this container should take you X amount of time. Or when they go to assemble, they pop up and it tells them how long, how much time this should take them to assemble. And then their goal is to kind of stick to that. And so I like that. That's one option. You could also display your average times for those most commonly used containers. And depending on your HR, because I don't want anyone getting in trouble, you either white out the names, or if you can be transparent and show those names, then it may encourage Sally to work a little faster, and it may encourage Frank to slow down. So it's always about finding that balance, always about that quality versus quantity. And I mean, you can't, when you look at that quality, where do you put that in order of quantity? Because we've got to get our stuff done in a reasonable amount of time. Seamus, I will pass this over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, so this is something I get really excited about because we've got some really great data, and we've learned some really cool things from our customers. So one of the things that we learned is, you want to understand, like Kelly said, for a couple of different reasons, how long should it take to assemble a given tray? If somebody's slower than normal, that could be fine. As long as they're not sacrificing quality. You might find that some people are a little faster. In either case, like Kelly said, you want to balance quality with speed and understand where you've got opportunities for growth. So what we've learned from the data is, and this is up here on the slide, is that if you look at the number of instruments in a tray, that can help you understand how long it should take to assemble that tray. And there's a white paper done, a study done by another group out there that found essentially the same thing we did. What they found is that it should take about 12 and a half seconds per instrument to assemble a tray. So if there's only one instrument in the tray, it would be 12 and a half seconds to assemble the tray. If there's 10, it would be 12 and a half seconds times 10, right? So 125 seconds. So we find that that works on average, but only on average. So for example, if you look at laparoscopic trays per instrument, they're going to be much slower to assemble than that. They're going to take more time per instrument. And if you look at, like the big sets with all the screws that snap in place, those are going to be much faster per instrument. So that brings me to the point. You want to consider tray complexity as well. But the point of this is you can use this kind of information when you use your tracking system and look at, for each technician, how long are they taking to assemble each of these trays? You can find outliers. So sometimes there is an opportunity for growth. You might have a new technician who would benefit from tailored education, right? You could have somebody who's been around for years, but came from a facility where they didn't do a particular service line. So they're actually new to a given service line. They're learning that instrumentation. You want them to be slower. But again, there's an opportunity for growth. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where sometimes people figure out how to cut corners. They might figure out how to game the system. And what you'll see in their data is they're assembling the same number of trays as everybody else, but their assembly times are like super fast. And that's an indication. That should be a red flag, and it should be an indication that here's somebody you probably want to figure out what they're doing, because what they're doing might be dangerous. So as Kelly talked about, you want to find that balance between speed and quality. And when we look at our data, we find some really, really cool things there as well. We found that it is absolutely true that when people rush, they're more likely to make mistakes. But people don't rush all the time. What the data shows is that people are most likely to rush when there's a lot of trays waiting to be assembled or waiting to be cleaned and deconned. When there's a lot of trays down, that's when people tend to rush. The rest of the time, the data suggests that technicians are diligent and they're following the process when they're not behind and they don't need to catch up, which is absolutely fantastic. The other thing that we found in the data, and again, this won't come as a surprise to anybody, but we found that the more proficient the technician is, the less likely they are to make mistakes, and the more trays they process in a day. And again, like I said, nobody's going to be surprised by this, but seeing the data is really, really cool. It is seeing with data what we all know to be true, and that's that people matter. People matter a lot. So you can measure, throughput per person. You can measure how many trays somebody assembles in a day. You can measure how many mistakes somebody makes. But another key indicator that we found is looking at how many different kinds of trays that technician knows how to assemble. And the reason that's important is if you think about it this way, when you have a new technician, you start them on one kind of tray, usually the easy stuff, stainless steel stuff, right? And as they learn the instrumentation, as they grow as a technician, you introduce new kinds of trays, and you eventually work up to the really hard stuff, like the vascular sets, the neuro sets, things like that, right? So if you, in your tracking system, are able to track for a given technician, how many kinds of trays do they actually assemble in a month, say, you can get a sense for where they really are as a technician. So it may be that they've been trained on the neuro stuff or the vascular stuff, but they don't feel comfortable with it. And so they'll pick the trays that are, ortho trays or whatever they feel comfortable with. And so by measuring, kind of their repertoire, if you will, you can understand where they are as a technician, and you can put together tailored education and coaching for that technician. And what's really important about that is, that as they grow as a technician, they're going to get faster. They're going to process more sets, and they're going to make fewer mistakes at the same time as a percentage of the number of trays that they process. Like I said, when we look at the data, we see the same pattern absolutely everywhere. And that is, as technicians grow, they get faster and they get better. Again, won't come as a shock to anybody, but it is really cool to see that investment in people, it's huge. It pays off. That your people matter, and they matter a lot, right? Super, super important. So yeah, again, this is another example of where you can use the data in your system to understand where you've got opportunities to help people grow. And as people grow, you're going to be able to do more, right, with the same people. Kelly.
Thank you, Seamus. So I have customers that track complexity by the number of instruments in a container. But as you know, there's a lot more to that. But I recommend you start somewhere. And I kind of like what these customers are doing. If it's 1 through 10, it's complexity of 1. 11 through 25 is a complexity of 2. And 26 through 40 or 50, it's a complexity of 3, and so on. So start somewhere, get those complexities in, then dig a little deeper, and then look at your individual sets. So you may have a laparoscopic set that only has 18 instruments in it, but in there are retractors that come apart into a million pieces, it feels like sometimes. You have to take those apart to clean them. You got to put them back together then on the clean side. And then you got laparoscopic cautery that you have to do insulation testing on. So that's going to take a lot longer to do those 18 instruments than it is going to take you to do those 18 instruments that are in a hand and foot tray. Those are all just stainless steel instruments. That's quick, that's simple, that's easy. And when you're looking at that complexity, you want to give staff the credit that's due. We all want credit for the work we do. Along with that, then you can take that to the next level and bring in that quality with that complexity. So the last facility I worked at, we had to track our error rates. And I would run the numbers and it would come up with, 0.00000, and then finally a number. We process about 8,000 containers and 30,000 peel packs a month. So when you looked at our error rate, it's, as I said, 0.0000. Finally, we get a number. So that's pretty good. It should be accepted. But is it? So think of that error. Yes. If it's an error that we're doing a tonsil nanoidectomy, they forgot a chemical integrator, I don't want to say not a big deal, but it's not as big of a deal as some of those, because we have 6 more on the shelf. I just grab another one, bring it in the room, because we're opening before the patient gets there. It's not a life or death. But what about those trauma cases and you're missing an instrument? What about that heart bleeder that comes rushing back in and you're rushing to set up, they're coming in as you're setting up, and in the middle of the case, you realize you've got soiled instruments? Or what about that total joint? In here, they use the wrong sterilization method. So that 0.0000, finally a number, it could truly mean that life or limb. When you look at that error rate, you want to track it, because of you can then look for patterns and trends. Years ago, I had a lady that was forever forgetting chemical integrators. And I could talk till I was blue in the face, as they say, about you've got to make sure you put them in there. So coworker next to her at the workstation overheard this, and she said, "You know what I do? when I get my container and I look right away, I know how many chemical integrators I have to do. I put in there. I set them right there on my workstation before I take the instruments out, before I do anything. Put them all in there, get everything together, put my chemical integrators in. If I wrap that or put it in the rigid container, put the locks in, and I see those chemical integrators sitting there, I know I forgot them. And now I've caught it before it even left. Yesterday I was at a facility, and they told me that of someone that they used to tape them to their arm. So they knew exactly how many went in there, and they wouldn't forget. And it's kind of like, okay, whatever works for you. But if you're tracking it, then you can pull that data to look for those patterns and trends. Is it always the same instrument that we're having an error issue with? Well, then maybe we need to put that in a different complexity level, or bring the rep in to do an in-service on this instrument or this whole container. And look at what is going on, and you see the bigger picture, think outside of the box. You're going to be able to give staff that credit where credit is due. You're going to be able to provide them that education. And there again, you're going to minimize that cost. And so how do you do this? That's where I go back to Seamus.
Yeah. So for this section here, one of the things I said at the beginning that I think is super important is making sure that people are recognized for the really important work that they're doing. So part of that is not just recognizing, technicians that process the most sets, because if you just do that, then you're going to end up incentivizing cherry picking, right? People are going to go, okay, well, now I know I'm measured on how many trays I process. So I'm just going to go get the easy stuff and do that. That way I make sure that I get a good review, right? So what many of our customers do is, yes, they'll recognize the person that processes the most trays, but they'll also recognize the person that processes the trays at the highest complexity level. So to do that, you've got to have complexity levels set in your system. And that, again, takes a lot of calories, right? So the best way to do that, first step one is you got to set a tray complexity policy. I know Amy's got some guidelines, but I think it's really important that you as an organization decide what your policy is going to be and document that. And then set the utilization first for the trays that are used most. So again, your tracking system will be able to tell you which trays you're turning all day, every day. Look at the top, say 25 trays that you turn every day. Set complexity for those. That's a doable bite-sized chunk, right? And then you move to the next 25, the next 25, the next 25. Once you've done 100, you probably have complexity data on the 80% of the trays that you turn every day. So then you tackle the next 100. And now almost everything that comes through the department is going to have a complexity level on it. Once you've got that, then like I said, you can start to recognize technicians who are picking up those really difficult sets. You can also use the data in your tracking system to see who's processing the sets with the most instruments in it. So the big sets. And you want to call that out and recognize that as well. I think it's just awesome when I see departments that are doing that. I know that the technicians really appreciate being recognized for the hard work that they do. And too often they aren't. So I think that's just really important and really, really awesome to see. So I love that we've got some questions in the chat there. I do want to take a moment here, Kelly, and kind of go through those questions. We've got just a couple of minutes left. I think Brett's going to jump in and cut us off when it's time, but
I can hop in here and help run through these questions if you guys want me to do the moderator piece. Because as you pointed out, Seamus, and some great information. Thank you both for that presentation. That was awesome. But yeah, as you pointed out, we have some really good questions. So we've got some time and might as well motor through a few of them. So I'll start here with Frank. He says, the questions are if it is safe then is it efficient? And if it is efficient, is it safe? Is there a performance and quality calculator to track, measure, and report volume versus defect error?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, most of the tracking systems out there will allow you to collect volume data, will allow you to collect defect data. The best tracking systems should allow you to get that information. The ones I'm familiar with certainly do. And you're absolutely right. You want to take the number of defects you have in a period of time, divide that by the number of trays you process to get a rate, right? Like if you have 100 defects in a month, that's great, but is that good? Is that bad? Until you put that in the context of your volume, you don't really know. What we do know from data is that best of best facilities approach about a 0.5% error rate. That's 50 trays out of every 1,000 that are sent to the OR will come back with some kind of an issue, hole in the blue wrap, bioburden, missing instrument, whatever the case may be, right? But it's about a 0.5% error rate. We do have some customers that are better than that, but they really are leading the pack. And again, you'll see some outliers on the other end where you've got a facility that has like a 3% error rate. But typically when defect rates get that high, the OR gets involved, and that kind of problem tends not to persist for very long. Changes are made and that gets rectified. But yeah, great question.
Awesome. Well, Kelly, I'll bounce this one over your way, and this is more or less a comment, but looking for some insight. But this comes from Stacy, and her comment is, my experience is that the more focus you put on assembly speed, it encourages techs to focus only on their work, and then things like answering the phones or emptying the cart wash or helping a teammate get ignored because everyone is focused on their work rather than our work. So how about some insight on that one?
Yep. So I presented one time on, and part of that, one of the presentations with that was, if everyone's responsible, no one's accountable. So I'm a firm believer in using assignments. So if somebody has the phone that day, they're the phone person. Maybe they're also then your cart washer person. They're your answering the door person. And then they're only going to be doing peel packs. So that way they're not distracted, because there's nothing worse than you're assembling a container and you've got to run answer a door. You've got to run unload the cart washer. Then you come back and it's, where was I? So kind of take those assignments, put those in there. But then along with that is, we all need to work together. And it can be, I got to get this done. I got this time. I can't help you right now. But if everybody's kind of in that same understanding, it's, hey, can you help me when you get a moment? And then when I finish this container, then I can help them. I don't want people to get hung up on that speed, on that quantity, without thinking of quality. To me, quality is number one. To me, it's quality is number one, because if you're focused on quality and you can't hit that quantity, then perhaps you do have your case to say, we need to do something, and here are some ways we can do it. Optimize that inventory, optimize those count sheets. Now you got the ammunition to say, here's how we can do this. And if it's a matter of having your leadership watch this presentation, go for it, because that's how we're all gonna, think outside the box. We're all gonna be able to brainstorm together.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think as we all will, we recognize that on the other end of all of this is a patient. And so the quality piece is of the utmost importance. I think speed, yes, but quality, I think, is the, really the outlier, and it really does take precedence. So that's great. I think we have time for one more. So Seamus, I'll bounce this over to you. This comes from Wendy. When you say assemble a tray, is the start when the tray hits the table to the scan and the couch sheet prints, or does the time end when the set is containerized or wrapped?
Yeah, great question. Both are important, but for the purposes of analyzing the data, we were starting the clock when they start putting instruments in the tray, and we ended the clock when the last instrument went in the tray. You're absolutely right, though, that the total touch time for that tray does go all the way until it's wrapped. Super important. But as we were analyzing the data and looking for these insights, looking for patterns, that's where we were starting and stopping the clock. And then one other question I did want to answer was Robert's question, max number of instruments per tray. What we see is that typically hospitals have between, on average, 20 to 30 instruments in a tray for the trays that they process. Where hospitals have an average tray size higher than that, they tend to have much lower throughput and bigger opportunities.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Seamus and Kelly, for joining us for this session. A lot of great information. And for those of you out in the audience, if you joined us late, feel free to log in on demand to watch the entire session. And if you have questions for Seamus and Kelly, please reach out to them via LinkedIn. Or their emails are also included on the right-hand side of the panel. We are moving quickly here, so we're going to be jumping into another session here shortly. But we're going to have about a 9-minute break. For those attending the rest of the sessions, we're going to be you will be automatically directed to the next session. So click already registered and then enter your email, and you'll get kicked over to the next session. You can access your CE survey and certificate at the end of the conference, so make sure to stick with us throughout the day, and we will see you again very shortly. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.